All right.
All right.
Here we are.
And we're live.
And we're live. Danny hasn't got his mic to do the intro, but we are live.
We are live. We are live. And it is a dreary Monday. I'll be honest. We had a great weekend. Did a lot of hiking, and so when you go upstate and then you come back to the city, there's a feeling of like, ugh.
Yeah. But I'm sufficiently buoyed by the memories from the weekend. I feel like Tim and I were upstate. We'd got out of the city, went to some glorious mountains upstate in New York for a bit of a hike. I love the leaves, right? I love this is what New York's famous for at this time of year, all the leaves, different colors, and you go up there and I feel like that's the first time I've properly experienced it. I've always timed it badly when I've missed them all.
Yeah.
But they were in the full range of colors from still some greens, some bright yellows, some browns, some reds, deep reds. Oh man, it was amazing. So I'm full of that energy. I love getting out to nature, and then I come back to the city, and it's as long as I know I can get out there now and then yeah, that's all good. So I'm all right today.
Yeah, now we get to talk about the American Music Fairness Act.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, a lot of, this week, and we'll ease into this, but a lot of interesting things going on legally within the music industry that is actually, I would argue beneficial for songwriters and artists and the music industry as a whole.
Indeed.
Yeah, but no, it's good to get back in the city, good to get back to the grind. But yeah, I think just seeing the leaves change, just seeing what it would be like if I didn't live in New York City and, actually make good decisions with my life. Yeah, it's funny, the older you get, you start to value different things.
Oh, totally, you do. Yeah. But life's about balance and variety. You know
Definitely.
what I mean? If you get too much of one thing, it's never good. So you have to balance it up. But I love this time of year. We're sitting in here, I've got a sweater on. I feel like we've taken a little bit of a break because we've both been traveling. We managed to get on, one episode here a few weeks ago, and then before that, we had our, our Zoom episode that we did. So, but it's been a little while, and we're hoping to get back onto a run here. But listen, last time, my memories of late have been it's piping hot, middle of the summer. We've got the AC going. Well, actually, we had to stop the AC because the mics were picking it up.
Yeah, and
then you're sitting here sweating. But this is a good time of year, and I feel like things are comfortable. We're sitting here with a couple of pumpkin ales, seasonal beers.
Cheers to that.
Yeah, cheers to that. Yeah. So, and I actually love these things. I love these things. There's cheers, Danny. Yeah, there you go. Have a sip of this. So, yeah, no, it's a good time of year. And
it's actually, it's the time of the year where the music industry starts to slow down. I know for a fact that Spotify does their annual retreat around this time. Wow. And I forgot where they're going this year, but the whole company doesn't work for a week and they go to Barbados or something.
Really?
It's kind of amazing.
It's not the case at my place. I know that some of the majors have their fiscal year end at the end of Q3. So that's the big rush to get everything, hit all the results and hit the targets for the end of September. And then I guess this is the start of the new fiscal year. So maybe that's a quieter period, but not the case at my place. I am off my feet at the minute, and it is busy, and it will be until the end of the year. So
yeah, and I mean we're in October now, but it's tends to be less releases because people don't want to compete with Christmas time, and it's just all of these different factors that limit the amount of music that's released around this time. Yeah, and I have to wonder if a lot of that is actually still the consumer still really cares about. Or we're just sort of doing these things because we've been doing them forever. Don't release music in, towards the end of December.
Yeah.
Do people really care, I wonder?
Well, I think it's probably not as important. It depends what type of artist you are. But for radio stations, I mean, pretty soon it's all going to be Christmas music. And, if, good luck trying to get, a new song on in place of Mariah Carey. So it just depends what type of artist you are, and you know, if that's the goal. But yeah, I mean, we're still in October, so you know, it hasn't even been Halloween yet, but it's coming up, and then yeah, the end of the year is going to be here in no time. But you know, at our place, we're now doing a lot of deals to try to hit targets for the year end and get our like fill any holes for our 2023 release schedule, basically. So
got you.
We're yeah, all hands on deck, and you know, it's gonna be a crazy couple of months, but
well, that's awesome. And I hear you are a scholar now. You were speaking on you're speaking on panels, and people are inviting you out to give your professional knowledge. So I think it's good for the listeners to know that you're not just full of crap. Like, you actually know what you're talking about.
50%, 50-50. But
describe that. Describe that. What happened? What happened to you? Was that last weekend or the 2 weekends ago?
Two Fridays ago.
Yeah.
So I was invited to a music conference that was being held in New York City, and I was asked to speak on a panel. It was a lot of industry professionals, some people with a lot of experience, a wealth of experience, and in, you know, very significant positions in the music industry. So I don't know how I got onto that panel, to be honest, but it was a good experience. Learned a lot, and you know, hopefully imparted some value to the listeners that were there, and also got a couple of plugs for the Record Shepherds podcast.
Amazing.
Hell yeah. So and we actually picked up some offers of guests who would love to come on to the pod to discuss some topics. So we're going to tap into that and bring the listeners a range of topics and knowledge from other people. So stay tuned.
Was there a theme of the panel?
Yeah, there was, as you might expect. It was policy shifts within the music industry and basically what causes those. So we were talking about a lot of legislation that is before Congress at the minute for you know, consideration, things that may or may not be passed. But I think all the acts that we were talking about, or all the sort of bills, sorry, I should say, that we were talking about, I think are like, you know, positive for the music industry to the extent they were to be passed. So now there's a couple, we'll go into it, that were sort of like in opposition to those sort of pro music bills, but we can talk a little bit about what some of those were. But yeah, it seems like there's a lot of good things happening for the music industry, and there's a lot of you know, I think like one of the takeaways as a whole for the panel was that there is this kind of shift. I think, you know, if you just put your finger in the air and took like a wind check, there is like a bit of a shift towards doing the right thing by creators and trying to recognize the value that creators sort of bring to the industry.
This is in the United States specifically.
In the United States, but I think it's happening in Europe as well.
Yeah.
And
well, it seems like other countries are sort of more aligned and maybe more progressive in that sense of taking care of like the artist communities within their countries. Like, you know, I know like Australia and Canada, for example, have programs that promote music from like local musicians before they will outside musicians. So, you know, I think, you know, we're sort of playing catch up with some of those things.
Yeah, in Canada, there's a lot of grant funding that's available. Like you've got like Factor and Star Maker and things like that. So, you know, but most of this was just, you know, talking about, or a lot of it was how, like, you know, one of the things that you're always mindful of is that technology has really accelerated the music industry in the past, let's call it, you know, like 15 to 20 years. And most of the time, the law is so ancient in comparison to these like new technologies, you know, that like it's always playing catch up, and you're trying to work in the law around to make it fit these new technologies, and that involves like a lot of sort of adaptions, and you're trying to basically shoehorn in principles of law around an industry that's like rapidly advancing and changing, and often it's quite hard to keep up with it. So that's the thing that you got to remember. And like Europe is grappling with the same issues that we are over here, and but I think like on the whole there is a bit of a movement right now, and I think it's like I wanted to explore some of these things, some of this legislation, just because I thought it was an interesting panel, and there was a lot of, like, as I say, like very experienced people on there, and it was a good conversation. Jesus, it was 10 a.m. on a Friday, like first thing on a Friday. I thought there was going to be nobody there. Wow, I was kind of hoping there'd be nobody there, to be honest with you, but no, it was packed out, and yeah, it was. I think it was actually quite an interesting discussion. Yeah, and speaking of panels, I think the more that this thing grows and our audience grows, and it would be nice to sort of get out there and maybe rent out a space behind a bar somewhere and like do a little panel in Brooklyn, live show, live show, yeah, like a little clinic, yeah. I think that would be good. Yeah, just because I think some things are easily digestible when you're drinking. Yeah, well, you get a good chat going when you're drinking, don't you? Like, exactly. I quite like this new Monday night approach of having a couple of beers or pumpkin ales, whatever you might fancy. But yeah, that's a good idea. We should. I mean, look, I think we've got a few guests lined up, hopefully that we'll get onto the pod this year, and then next year, I'd love to expand it like that and get out there to the community. So we shall see. Okay, yeah, with that, let's dive into maybe the first policy being discussed. Can we touch on the RAP Act first? Yes, the RAP Act. So, like all these US bills, they seemingly have to have like an acronym that is easily rememberable in a word itself. So the RAP Act, Restoring Artistic Protection Act. And essentially, like, this is a bill that's been introduced by Congressman Hank Johnson of Georgia, and New York's own Jamal Bowman. And it would be an amendment to the federal rules of evidence that would add a presumption to limit the admissibility of artistic or creative expression used against artist or the author of that artistic expression in criminal proceedings. Right. And that's like, well, what does that actually mean? And like, this has been talked about at length on like podcasts and panels and media, etc. But for anyone just hearing about it the first time, like, it essentially means, or what it boils down to for conversational purposes here this evening, is that it would limit the admissibility in criminal proceedings, i.e. a court, of artistic expression, let's call it lyrics, because that's typically what has been the case here in the United States. Like, prosecutors have been using artists' lyrics against them in criminal proceedings as evidence of like kind of like what this person's up to and what they're about, etc. Yeah. And so this bill seeks not, and I should say, not to totally ban any admissibility, but just to limit that admissibility, and then sort of get on to like talk about what some of the exceptions are. But I mean, most recently, two of the more the more written about in the media artists who have suffered at the hands of this have been Young Thug and Gunna. Yeah, and I was just going to add on to that, and I don't know if this was said, but I mean, the reason why it's called the RAP Act is because the technique of using lyrics as evidence in court is disproportionately done in target of rap and hip hop artists. Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. That's an important point to point out. You're right.
And I mean, the reason why that's important, and there's a lot of cultural nuance to this conversation, right? There's certainly a segment of hip hop and rap that comes from the streets and comes from, a place of expressing not only the dangers from the neighborhoods that certain artists come from, but how they get out of them as well, and how they progress in their lives, and the narratives and stories that they tell are ones that they personally experience. And that's not the only style of hip hop, but it's one that's certainly one of the most popular in terms of consumption. And this is not something that's, I guess, being done to artists of other genres. However, the Rap Act does seek to protect artists of every genre. It doesn't matter what specific style of music you're making.
Yes.
It's giving you the freedom to be able to use your lyrics and protect your expression with certain exceptions, as you were saying.
Yeah, that's right. And you're right. It does protect and not even just like lyrics, I guess, but that you're absolutely correct when you say that, like, historically, the tradition is there for the prosecutors to use rappers' lyrics against them. And,
right.
You can get into that because a lot of the themes of rap music, there is like a lot of like criminal themes that are like run throughout rap music. So it's, you could argue that it lends itself more than that, where it's difficult to use like Taylor Swift's lyrics against her,
Yeah.
But look, there was a very, like, I saw it written in a piece of journalism, and it was like, Bob Marley was not confessing to having shot a sheriff.
Right.
It's just a song, and he's entitled, as part of his like artistic freedom to come up with these lyrics. And I think like a lot of rappers, like, you could say exactly the same about them. Yes, they're criminal themes in like the lyrics, but just because that's how they're rapping and that's their art form, doesn't mean that it's a confession.
Correct.
So it is like, I think, important to protect artistic freedom in that manner. And I should say that this would be like a federal bill that they're looking to pass, but recently in California, like a couple of weeks ago, there was actually a bill passed in California that essentially did exactly the same thing. So it was like California state's version of that law.
Yeah, and this is a federal law a bill that's trying to be passed, but as you had pointed out earlier, the focal point of sort of this conversation of protecting rap lyrics is Fulton County, the DA there, Fannie Willis.
Fannie Willis, yeah.
And the case with Young Thug and Gunna specifically, and other rappers. And maybe we can get into some of the exceptions. But it's like, in our research, we were watching interviews of her, and it's very hard to sort of argue with her perspective as well.
Totally. It's like all these things. It's not like just like black and white, clear cut. Like, and from her perspective, she's of the opinion that like there are crimes being committed in her county, and from her perspective, she's like, like her side of it is like, you don't get to commit crimes in my county and then essentially brag on it in rap lyrics and expect not to have that used against you. Right. And like there's victims, there's usually multiple victims to every crime, etc. So it's not that like there's no place for that argument,
right?
But like you can get sort of further into that, like should anyone be convicted like solely on that stuff? Surely the prosecution should have more than that, be able to build their case with more like hard evidence than just like, oh, listen to his lyrics and his rap song,
And I think that should be, I think that you're spot on with that prosecutors have to sort of prove in their investigation that it didn't start with the rap lyrics, and they were sort of using that as a blueprint to then go find other evidence. But it was other evidence that was found that's maybe sort of substantiated or corroborated by the lyrics that ties into like an overall group of evidence, rather than just say, oh, he rapped about this, we're going to use that to then find other things to prosecute this person.
Exactly. And look, there will be circumstances where, someone's rap lyrics are genuinely a confession,
Right.
To a crime, then, like someone's been murdered or whatever. And that's something worth pointing out in the bill. It's not a blanket ban on using rap lyrics, but it's just limited to their admissibility in front of a jury. And if there are certain circumstances where the prosecution believe it is clearly a, word for word confession or whatever, then they can present that to the judge, like not in front of a jury, but like before the trial, to actually have that, conversation with the judge, for the judge to decide if something is admissible or not. So there are certain caveats there that are built into a lot of these bills too. And we'll see that like a lot of these bills are well thought through.
Right.
It's not just like, I don't know.
Me and you putting together a bill.
Like, I think we put together a pretty good bill, to be honest. But you know what I'm saying? They're thought through, and like and anyway, part of the process of when these bills are introduced to Congress is like they automatically go to a committee to actually stress test the bill and actually come up with ideas, etc. And it has to get past that committee before it will then be put to the vote in the House of Representatives or the Senate. So but that's what's going on. And as I say, the same type of bill was actually passed in California. Right. So
there's a precedent there.
Yeah, there's movement in that direction, and we'll see what happens. But I think from a lot of artists' perspective, it is important that creative freedom of expression is protected, and if you got that, then it can only be a good thing.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to see if there's any retroactive action that would need to be taken once the bill is passed. Like if you have to look at prior convictions and if rap lyrics were used in those trials, if you have to go back and take a look at those.
Yeah, probably not. But anyway, like going forward, you can change things for the future going forward.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is the Rap Act. Now, we can dive into maybe another act that is being, looked at on a national scale. Which one do you want to go to? The American Music Fairness?
Yeah, the American Music Fairness Act. I thought this was a good one because, me not originally coming from these shores.
America.
America. Yeah, this one is always something that I find like a bit curious as to why, it is this way. But just to remind the listeners, okay, when you're paid, when your music is played on the radio, there's a performance royalty that is due to you for the broadcast of the song side, right? The actual composition.
Right.
And performance royalties are big business. That's now like pretty much the number one sort of like tranche or slice of revenue, like royalty revenue that comes from the publishing side of the game.
And what are some other examples of public performance royalties? Like at a concert?
Yeah, like on the song, so if you play your if your song is performed at a venue, like live, there's performance royalties, like live performance royalties are due on that. And then on streaming, anything like broadcast or satellite radio is big one, or just but terrestrial radio. Anytime the song is performed live or for public or played to the public, let's say, you're due a performance royalty.
And then, go ahead.
Well, and it's a big but. Well, you got to remember that the neighboring right, as they call it, to the sort of performance royalty on the song, when it comes to these things like performance on the radio, it's not just the song that's been played, as we know, it's the recording itself. And
Right.
for those, just as a very, very quick refresher for those people who have not listened to previous episodes, there's a difference between the song and the sound recording. They're two different copyrights owned by two different sets of rights holders. So there is a performance royalty played for the song, but not necessarily
For the sound
for the
recording.
sound recording. I'm gonna say not necessarily. There is everywhere else.
Yeah.
There is everywhere else.
Except
in
for
every
3
other
places.
country. Yeah, there's 3 countries in the sort of industrialized world that do not pay musicians royalties for the performance of the sound recording on terrestrial radio. And terrestrial radio, we're talking about AM and FM radio. Those 3 countries, do you know them?
I do, but I'll let you say it.
So we've got North Korea,
Mm-hmm.
Iran,
And
the good old United States of America.
woohoo! the
USA.
Yeah, there should be some sort of alliance between those 3 countries.
I know those other 2 countries. I have to say I've never been to either. But generally speaking, when it comes to fairness and equity,
Yeah.
those are not the 2 countries that immediately spring to mind
Yeah.
that I'd want to be aligned with.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
So just for the sake of like simplifying, just as an example, if you are a recording artist, and let's say you get, some of your friends that are songwriters to write a song for you, and let's say in a crazy situation, you owned a very small amount on the publishing side of the song because you didn't write it, and then you record the song, you perform it, and it gets played on the radio. You, as a recording artist, don't get paid anything in the United States for the actual sound recording being played on the radio.
Yeah, there's no performance royalty due to you in that circumstances on terrestrial radio.
Correct.
Now, back at the turn of the century when the world was going digital,
Mm-hmm.
the part of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act made it that there was a performance royalty on the recording side due for performance on digital satellite radio.
Okay.
So like Sirius, XM, Pandora, those sorts of things. You do get a performance royalty due, and that's why Sound Exchange was created. Okay, Sound Exchange was like a statutory created body to collect in those income streams and pay it out to performers and the rights holders of the sound recordings, i.e. record labels. But here in the United States, there is still not a performance royalty due when the same sound recordings are played on terrestrial radio, AM, FM. And like it's, it stems from, we were going into this in the panel, where does it stem from? And really it stems from that, like, radio is huge business in the United States, and there are
Some great lobbyists.
on their half, like more powerful lobbyists on, from the radio side than there was from the record industry side, essentially. And
that's, I would argue, that's probably essentially because radio business is advertising business, right?
yeah, big.
You have bigger money, bigger sort of vested interest in radio than in the strict music industry.
Absolutely. And, it is big business. And the other thing, they always relied on the fact that it's like, oh, it's promotional.
Right.
It's promotional, they like, and it is true. There's no denying, like, there's a huge promotional aspect of terrestrial radio for it sells records. And that's why for a certain type of artist, the game is all about trying to get your artist, on the right radio stations, because that will shift records, and you will, as ultimately that sells tickets, puts bums on seats.
Right.
So there is all of that stuff, but look, this is always the balance. Like nearly everything, every time music is played somewhere, you could say there's an aspect of it that is promotional, right? And it's like you hear this all the time. Working legal and business affairs. We get so many license requests, and it's like, oh, we want a free license. Well, it would like just give us that for free. It's promotional.
Yeah,
it's promotional. Sure,
it's not a very good argument. Yeah,
it's like you'd be giving everything away for free if you listen to that the whole time.
Yeah,
and I think as we head further into the the music subscription service era, the terrestrial radio is, the power is waning. They're losing the grip on on that sort of power.
Well, that's sort of the irony in it, right? Is that as the influence of terrestrial radio diminishes, only now are we as a society, or at least in the United States, sort of seeking more money for recording artists on that platform.
Yeah, totally. Well,
and it's not for nothing, right? But it's it'll be interesting to see if this act had been passed 40 years ago or 30 years ago, where recording artists would be today. Who
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a lot of
or record companies.
Yeah. Well, look, here's one thing about it that where it directly benefits. If this was to be passed, this act, where how it would directly benefit like U.S. performers and artists. As I said, nearly everywhere in the world has this system where royalties are paid. Right. Okay. So artists all around the world outside the United States are benefiting from these recording royalties, and it's a valuable income stream for them. However, because the US does not pay that royalty, all the other societies abroad, they do not pay out for like US recorded music or US artists. They don't send it back to the US.
Wow.
So there's all this foreign income, which all the other sort of like the UK artists, the Australian artists, the French artists, the German artists, whatever it might be, they're benefiting from this income stream. And US artists are technically earning that money as well. In all these countries, like the law is there that they'll be payable, but in each of those countries, they've basically set up a system between the collection societies that it's like, we are not reciprocating for US artists. We're not sending that money back to the US because you do not pay it for our performers and artists.
Wow.
So if this gets passed, like right away, there's going to be a huge influx of not only the domestic income that would be coming to the artists and music industry, but also all this foreign and earnings that have long been there but just don't get paid through to the US.
So there's no system in place now where artists in the US can go get that money?
No, they don't pay out because the US won't pay out on their artists.
Wow.
So yeah, it's money's been left on the table. And look, here's just to talk a little bit about the the lobbying and things like that. Like there have been attempts to sort of like get momentum up and get bills like this passed in the past, but they've just failed because as I say, the lobbying for the radio companies has has been so strong. So this new bill, like the American Music Fairness Act, was introduced partially in response to the radio industry's own bill, right, which was basically let's just keep everything the same. We don't want to have to pay royalties or whatever. And it's called, what was it called? It was called the I love the name of this act. Like it's just like the names of these acts kill me. It's called the Local Radio Freedom Act.
Oh my God.
Isn't that amazing?
Local Radio Freedom
Act. Everyone loves local radio and everyone loves freedom. Why would you want to fuck with either of those
That's
things?
the American way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and that's all about just basically, that's been championed by the NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters. And it's basically saying like, oh, like we can't afford to pay these royalties. That'll put radio stations out of business, etc. But touching on what I was talking about earlier, these bills are well thought through, and because they know that they got to pass, and there's going to be, there'll be congressmen and women arguing on behalf of
The radio station.
the radio stations, the people who are paying their bills,
Yeah.
etc. And there are certain exemptions, and they're like really generous exemptions. Like I believe for certain broadcasters, if your annual revenues are less than $1.5 million,
Mhm.
which is that's a like, it's not nothing. 1.5 million, right? I'd love for us to be bringing in 1.5 million a year.
Yeah.
Or your parent company is earning less than, I think it's $10 million, then you get like a significant discount on your bills. And I think like from memory, it's something like, if you're earning anything less than those thresholds, you're talking about somewhere between $100 and a maximum of $500 annually as your blanket fee.
Wow.
As is, so like that, it's not a lot of money. And then I think for like public and college and non-profit radios, there's like a total exemption altogether. So you're really talking about big corporate radio here that can easily afford to pay these royalties, that already pays them on the songwriting side, but just for years has refused to pay artists and record labels on that side.
I'm sitting here trying to think of a parallel in any other industry where the literal foundation of your business relies on the musicians.
Yeah.
Or like, what other industry is like, okay, the people that are actually making the product are getting paid the least amount of money. It's a bit silly.
I think, do you know what it is? Like a lot of these, I think the music industry like kind of cottoned onto this when it came to the digital era, because there was all these, like all the playlists. There used to be like all the YouTube playlists, like Majestic Casual and things like that were building these businesses of, I guess like record labels exclusively signed artists, and they would come in and they'd like issue label waivers so they could record, and they'd say it was promotional.
Right.
It was promotional. And then like I think like the record labels started getting wise to that and said, this is another example of people building huge businesses for free.
Right.
Around, well, not for free, but they're not paying for to record these exclusively signed artists. And I remember when I was at another place that they were like reviewing this, they were keeping tabs on it, and they were essentially saying like, no, we, the record label, are going to own these recordings and we're going to claim them on YouTube, etc. Which was, that torpedoed the business model. So I'd be interested to see how that turned out. But to your point, you think about it, it's an absolute joke. The whole business model of these like music orientated radio stations, it's built on music, and yet they're not willing to pay for it.
Yeah. And as somebody who's worked at multiple labels, I can say that labels spend an enormous amount of money on radio campaigns. So when I first heard this, I was thinking, in some sort of like, and that money gets spent in a lot of different places, like independent radio promoters, etc. But I was wondering if this would, increase the amount of money that record labels will now have to spend at these radio stations, with like the rationale being, well, we're paying more, annually in these royalties, so therefore like radio campaigns are going to cost more.
Yeah, I mean,
but the cost might not be as direct as that. But I'm just curious to see what the relationship would be like now between record companies and radio stations.
Yeah, like a cause and effect. And I think for a lot of like radio promo agencies, now they're worth more money. You know, it's like, now you come to us and we get you on the radio playlists. Well, now you got this additional revenue stream coming in, so that'll definitely be factored in. It's like free market economics. I would say that's definitely the way it would work. We got to get somebody in here who is willing to talk openly and honestly about the radio industry. That would be a very interesting conversation. And we would have to approach that very interestingly. I'd say, people would be very careful about it.
We need somebody who's like retired and, working somewhere else.
Oh, that would be awesome. All the sort of payola stories, etc. And
you said it, not me.
I didn't say it. What's your, do you think
I could
there'd be people who would say that you know, there's a danger of that sort of thing happening on the DSP playlisting sites.
It's very hard. It's happening 100% on like user playlists, like very, very popular, you know, like DJs who have playlists on these DSPs and they have 100,000 followers. And I mean, there's some of that where it's genuine. Oh, they like your music, they'll put it on. But a lot of that is payola too. So you have like independent radio promoters who work on that, or independent commerce or sales people who work on that. But I mean, labels have relationships with editors at DSPs. But I think just in the new age, it's a bit harder to get away with that stuff. Not saying that it doesn't happen, but
it's probably not as much of an issue because it's like not as much of a monopoly.
Yeah, and we don't have to go down like a radio rant, but in terms of what I've found is any industry that has a bit of shade, there's always going to be some rationale as to why that happens. And I've spoken to radio people and I've heard very good arguments for why certain things need to be paid for, and they wouldn't necessarily describe it as, quote, payola now. But, you know, you just kind of have to read between the lines a little bit. But with that said, I'm not a radio promoter, neither are you. So it would be really interesting to get somebody who works in that industry on this podcast. But
yeah, if there's anybody out there listening and wants to come in and have a little chat about that with
and get their take on this and what they think about the stations now having to pay royalties on the performance side. Exactly.
That would be good. So but listen, that would be one that I think would be very interesting to follow along, because that's certainly like going to be a windfall gain basically to the music industry if that one comes through, as it says. And I'd say Sound Exchange will be a lot busier as well. Yeah. So
shout out to Sound Exchange. Shout out to Symphonic Distribution as well. I know they do a lot of work in terms of neighboring rights and standing up for artists as a whole. So it's good that you have organizations and companies out there that are doing the right thing for artists, musicians, songwriters.
Yeah, and I'll give a shout out to PPL in the UK, which are basically the equivalent, the Performance Royalty Collection Society on the sound recording side. So they've been long established and doing that great job of bringing money in for the UK artists and songwriters.
I totally skipped over
record labels, I should say.
Yeah, I totally skipped over my London trip. We didn't talk about that last podcast, or did we?
Did we? Had you come back from London?
I don't think I did. I think that was
no. You're right. At least recently been to London.
Well, won't go into that. All I got to say, it's a beautiful city.
We can go slightly into it. Where's your favorite bit that you went to?
Yeah, I mean, we went into the hipster Shoreditch neighborhood. Shoreditch. Yeah, it just looks like a cleaner Bushwick. Yeah, it's like it's more sophisticated. I'm sure. Listen, I was only there 5-6 days. Every place has its issues. I'm not quite educated on like the local politics and these things in that area, but I have to say I enjoyed. The people were overall nice. The food was amazing, despite what you hear. And I think it's like this: like you come to New York City, you're not just going to eat burgers and pizza and fries. Like you're going to go eat a lot of cuisines that are multicultural, and it's the same thing in London. You're going to get good Indian food, good.
Oh, mate, the best Indian food, like
the best, yeah.
Like Brick Lane is absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah. So, we'll see in the future if I could convince my employer to let me live there for a month or two. But I think I'm at that point where, and we talked about this in the beginning. It's just New York is feeling very foggy to me again, and I think I love this place and I'll be here for years to come, but it's just good to get out somewhere and live, live somewhere for like 6 months, even a year, and then come back and do your thing.
With a fresh perspective. Yeah. That's good. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed your trip there. I lived in London for 10 years and it's like a home from home.
Yeah.
So, looking forward to getting back there in December.
Yeah. Yep.
So anyway, the last bill that's currently, been presented to Congress and working its way through, and which we have an interest in here, especially on the record shepherds, where we're gearing a lot of this information and our episodes towards independent artists, okay?
Right.
And this one's all about that. It's called the Hits Act, another fantastic name. They've all got these great names.
Yeah.
They don't. That's Help Independent Tracks Succeed Act. I mean,
Wow.
why would you vote against it?
Yeah.
But
I'm sure there's a reason somebody came up with.
But on the title alone, you're voting for that every time, and that's basically an interesting act it aims to make 100% of recording costs incurred in a year tax deductible that same year.
Right.
Okay. And that would bring the music industry in line with the TV and film world, where that currently is the case, but not in the moment in the music industry. You have to amortize your recording costs over the economic life of that recording, which is on average you can get away with like about writing it off over 3 years. And so, what does that actually mean, for people who basically do rely on TurboTax and don't care about any of that stuff? But what does that actually mean? If something's if it's fully tax deductible that same tax year, that basically means, ultimately you've got more cash in your pocket that year.
Right.
And you can get back into the studio and you can make more music, right? That's what it's all about. And it was like, it's partially in response to the hardship that a lot of artists went through during COVID, where, everything came to an immediate standstill, and artists all of a sudden found themselves in a bit of a bind with like a lot of their income streams shut off, like live for one.
Right.
So this is like just an additional way of saying, hey, look, we're not out of the woods yet, and there's a lot of people still hurting, especially since like a lot of the support from the government stopped.
Yeah, and hopefully it encourages, because there's a lot of musicians that operate sort of under the table, especially when it comes to like, recording costs, and hopefully this encourages people, and it would be curious to see what they define as like a recording cost, right? Because that obviously to me means like, if you're an independent artist, you're paying a studio, or you're paying somebody's studio, you might be paying a producer, you might be paying instrumentalist, you might be paying an engineer. And so I would assume all of that is encompassed in the recording costs that would be, tax exempt. But yeah, it just sort of helps them gain some sort of legitimacy in what they're doing as an independent artist,
Yeah, 100%. And it's like, ultimately, like, keep an eye on that one, because, that is something that could really help a lot of our listeners. And, also, if you didn't know that you can write off like your recording costs, like over the useful life of the economic life of the recording, that's something you can do. So like, look into that. Make sure you're doing your tax returns properly, and you're not paying any more tax than you need to be.
Yes, definitely don't like to do that.
No, we don't like
that. Who I think it was. I just read that Tyler Perry fired. This is random, but he fired his accountants because they had overpaid the IRS $9 million in taxes.
Jesus, that's a lot.
But he's a billionaire, so in perspective, it's, to me, I read that and I was like, okay, well, just have him keep it, and then that takes care of some of your taxes for the next years. But I'm sure he probably made business decisions based on not having that income, and then he finds out he overpaid the IRS, which is also a shitty feeling. You never want to overpay the government,
Yeah, I'd love to hear the ins and outs of that. Maybe he decided, maybe he's just having a bad day, and he was like, they just got unlucky, whatever. Yeah. But or maybe he was looking for an excuse to get rid of them already. Who knows?
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, those were like, I just picked out 3 of the topics that we talked about. Some of the bills that are currently working their way through Congress that are going to hopefully they make it through and they get put to the vote, and then we'll see what happens from there. But more than anything, I think it's just like it's interesting to follow along to these things just to show that they're where things change. We're in a sort of like dynamic industry, and as I said, like technologies are racing on. Like there's another thing that we also discussed, which we won't necessarily talk about here, but it's another act that relates to ensuring that creators are more fairly paid for their content on
Right.
like the YouTube and all these sorts of like digital service platforms. And the point I was making was that like what we were saying earlier, like technology races ahead,
Yeah.
and it's up to the people who are advocating for artists and the music industry to actually understand the technology in the first place, and then trying to work out where are the unfairnesses, and or is it a fair deal for the artist, is it a fair deal for the songwriters, is it a fair deal for the companies who are investing in those artists and songwriters' careers, and trying to like pare all that information down to then finding out working out what the policy should be around these things, and do we need to change the current state of affairs. It's a lot.
Well, listen, I think that I think the music industry is maybe doing a better job now at adapting than they have in the past. And it's interesting because I feel like we need protections for the music industry so we don't repeat another collapse.
Mm-hmm.
If a recession comes, and some of that you can't help, but I think it's about shifting the mentality and not thinking of yourself as a music company, but maybe even a technology company or an entertainment company, where you have to sort of bring in people who know things about other industries in order to help your own. Because
Totally.
if you just stay in this box of selling records and that's it, you're going to be in a lot of trouble if we have another recession, because at the end of the day, music is considered by some to be a non-essential product, right? You don't need it to survive, and so that tends to be the first thing on the chopping block when people can't afford to spend extra income. Can you afford to spend money on that Spotify or Apple Music subscription when you're worried about feeding your family? And so
yeah. I mean, it will be interesting to see what happens like during COVID. And obviously the economy in a lot of places just went on hold, and a lot of like, especially the service industry,
right,
people there had no like bars to go and tend, and like tables to go and wait at restaurants, etc. And but the music industry was surprisingly resilient.
Yeah.
But you don't know how much of that is because of the checks everyone was getting, the government checks in the mail, etc. So
Right.
like, it looks like we are on headed for a recession here, like a bit of a recession.
Yeah.
And hopefully that is not long lasting. But it'll be, we'll see what happens to the music industry, if it feels the heat of that, or if now in the new streaming era that people are just like so used to paying their subscriptions and etc. that it's more greater protected than it has been in the past. But yeah, like technology is moving forward, and I think you're right. The music industry is embracing it more than it has been, and a lot of that is because there are all sorts of new revenue streams that are coming out that are being explored now, and that's, I think that can only be a good thing, especially for independent artists.
Yeah, in a way, it is a bit unromantic, right? I certainly, when I set out to work in the music industry, I didn't think I'd ever have to be thinking about Web3 or NFTs or any of these things, or like subscription, like coming up with marketing campaigns on subscription-based platforms for artists. It's at the end, you fall in love with the music, and you're just like, okay, at the end of the day, I just want to work good music. Or as an artist, I just want to make good music and not have to worry about other things. But unfortunately, we don't have that luxury.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
ultimately, like, you do want to be working with good music, and you do want to be
Yeah.
making good music. I think that doesn't change, but it's like, if you think about it in those ways, like, the marketing is like, well, it doesn't matter how good your music is if the right people aren't hearing it, and the right fans aren't getting a chance to listen to it. So the good marketing is like, how do we reach those fans, and how do where are our fans located, and how do we get to them, and let's think about ways to grab their attention, that because as we know, everyone's attention spans are getting shorter, so you got to get more and more clever, and that's ultimately what it's still about. So as long as as long as the music's good, you shouldn't sort of like mind too much. But unfortunately, the reality is like any job, you've got your tastes, and you've got like things don't appeal to you always, but that's part of it.
As long as your music is good, and as long as you listen to the Record Shepherds, you will be successful. Exactly. And on that, please listen to our podcast. You can listen to it anywhere where podcasts are streamed. You can follow us at the Record Shepherds on social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, you name it, we're on there. You can also email us with any questions, comments, or concerns at therecordshepherds@gmail.com. And if you're in town and you'd like to be on the show, shoot us an email, and we'll try to get you on the couch. But yeah, stay connected, stay commenting, stay giving us feedback. I'm getting a lot of cool messages from people I've never met before, which is really awesome, about how much they love the podcast. So it feels good to know that we're actually making a difference. And yeah, stay tuned for more guests and more content.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will be back soon with more guests and more episodes, and dissect some topics for you. So until the next exciting episode, stay tuned to the Record Shepherds.
Follow the guidance.
Follow the guidance of the shepherds.
Don't be the sheep. Be
the
goats. Woohoo!